Thanks so much, Rachel. Really appreciate it. Ron, thanks for being with us today. We're really excited about the content.
Being excited about this content, that says a lot right there. We'll see if everybody's excited when we get done.
Yeah, well.
All right, well, hey, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'll set the table for a little bit. It's right on the button at 1 o'clock. So just do a little bit of a intro about HireClix, and then I'll hand it over to you, Ron, do a little bit on your background. But my name is Neil Costa. I started HireClix 11 years ago. We are a recruitment advertising agency that provides recruitment marketing services, strategic consulting services, and creative services. So we run everything from programmatic campaigns to consumer ad campaigns and help clients drive their job applicant flow. And one of the challenges we're seeing right now in the last year and a half or so, that things have changed quite drastically. And so we turned to our partners over at Emsi and inquired about getting Ron on a call, so that way we could have him get his thoughts on what's actually happening right now and the collision of many factors that are causing this. And so we're really excited to have you, despite the might not all be rainbows and unicorns and champagne at this point, but it is what it is, and we all have to figure it out. And our clients are challenging us to have answers for the C-suite. So we're hoping to pick your brain and get some great insights to bring back to our clients and prospects we're talking to.
Outstanding. All right. Well, if we're ready to dive in, let's do this. So I am Ron Hetrick. So just a little bit about me. I was an economist with the Bureau of Labor Statistics for about 8 years in Washington, D.C., was a supervisory economist over the payroll survey there, went on to Allegis Group for 20 years as basically a chief economist, but I also kind of oversaw the labor market analytics sides, oversaw the data science teams. And then I joined Emsi late last year and basically came in at a time that so much was happening in the economy. I did some blogs at the time, one in particular about why weren't we seeing any applicants, especially at the lower end. And after that blog went out and had some success, they came back to me and they said, "Do you have anything else you're working on?" I said, "Well, I've been sitting on something for a couple of years that I've been thinking about writing about, and it seems like it might be the right time." And they said, "Well, this matches what we're doing, what we wanted to look at." So I became the lead author of this article you see called The Demographic Drought. So this deck today will be basically combining what that article has with what I've been studying for years as a labor economist. This is going to be hard material. I think it's going to be pretty shocking. I think you've been hearing more and more about it. I know that it seems like everybody in the country is trying to talk to me right now. On the past week, Wall Street Journal, CNBC, it's just like everybody's is having a conversation with me to try to get a better grip on what's happening. And we're going to step through this. And there's going to be some detail here, but I'm going to walk you through. I promise when you're done with this, you will understand what's happening. Maybe not be totally great with it, but at least, I'm kind of that doctor that tells you why you're sick. I don't exactly have all the cures. We'll have some thought at the end and some suggestions that I have. Based on what I've learned over the years in dealing with the problems that we've been having from a labor shortage side. So with that background, I want to talk about how I approach doing economic presentations. I always like to talk about what was the situation like before we got to the point where we are now. That context is going to be massive when we start to explain what's happening right now. We're going to talk about that current state conundrum. We're going to talk about, well, what's happening next. So this is all going to be economically speaking. Where were we? What's happening right now? And where are we going? And then lastly, we're going to talk a bit about what you can do. So we're going to try to throw some things out there that will help a bit. But these are more things that how do you make this conversation a bigger conversation than, these answers that we're going to give aren't things that solve a problem, but things that we all need to kind of play a part in doing. So with that in mind, let's dive into what was happening right before COVID. So first and foremost, we were talking about some of the lowest unemployment rates ever. But the biggest story that we want to talk about, and what we really hammer in the article, is this boomer generation is something we really need to understand. So these are people born between 46 and 64 as the definition of what we want to do in this article. And what we try to talk about here is, how did this group so profoundly impact us. Everybody on this call, I guess we're going to have very few people probably from the silent generation, but everybody on this call has only known one reality. And that reality is one that women started to enter strongly into our labor force around the late 1960s. These boomer women were coming into the labor force. And so we see that they had a 31% labor force participation rate at the end of World War II, and that jumped to a 60% labor force participation rate as of the mid-90s. These were not women that were just coming in taking any job. These were coming in and becoming increasingly educated. So if we look at the percentage of the population in the labor force that had a college degree, we see, males did kind of continue to go up over time. But if you look at that female number, that blue line, we're talking about, significant jumps from 65 to 75, 100% gain there. And then this incredibly sharp increase so that they actually overtook the percentage of males. This is an incredibly important aspect because we weren't just adding people into the economy, we were adding educated people who made good money. The problem with that is you have two-income families for the first time ever, making money an entire generation, and then they all slam into retirement ages. So I call this the tidal wave slide. So if you look at the grid at the bottom here, our dates, we're talking 1948 to around 2002. This is the number of people that were over 65 basically in our labor pool. And it's this nice, relatively flat, kind of growing curve. So to fully understand and appreciate what the baby boomers represent, you have to take a look at that right side, and you see that these are numbers, not percentages, going from around 15, 16 million to 40 million, which is where we are right now. So a massive wave of people. Imagine you're seeing the end of the tidal wave. So this is the one crashing to shore. But this was out in the ocean coming through your entire life. Anybody on here, I'm in my 50s now. This was happening over our entire lives. So that wave was coming through and having profound impacts, and now it's crashing to shore. So if we go right back, this is right before we started dealing with the COVID shutdowns. This was our reality that a lot of people, I don't think, fully remembered. It's almost like amnesia that we had. We had 7 million job openings, which at the time were record levels. There were 6 million people who were out of the labor force, but are like, hey, I'd like to work, but I can't right now. But we only had 5.9 million unemployed people. So we pretty much had 2 people who were for every job, but only one of them was actually able to work at this present time. So we were already in a pretty tight situation. That manifested itself in the lowest unemployment rate we had ever had in a non-wartime scenario. So to see the date on there is February 2020. So before we disrupted what was happening in the economy, understand that these were the tightest labor conditions that we had ever faced previously. Job openings were hovering around record levels. People were quitting at increasing levels. The amount of people that were out of work who wanted a job was starting to come down. Discouraged workers were disappearing. All of these people who wanted to work were working. The ones who didn't want to work were dropping out of the labor force. During this same time, one of the really important things that was happening, and we're really going to dive into this in the middle part of this, is millennials took over the boomers as the largest generation in the labor force. Something to keep in mind. So we're talking about that boomer wave crashing to shore. They were the dominant labor force. They are starting to retire out of that labor force. A lot of these people literally dropping out of it, and then they're being replaced by that millennial generation. The problem that we saw was as the millennials came in, labor force participation, which had been declining for men for quite a period of time, absolutely plunged. Once that labor force of millennial men came in and replaced the boomer men, X's are in here as well, but X's were declining a little bit, but what we notice is as millennial men enter in, the labor force participation rate takes quite a hit. Now, that had started to improve a little bit before the COVID shutdowns occurred, but as you can see, we really took a pretty big fall there. We're going to talk in more detail about the right side of this graph when we talk about what's happening right now. But what I want you to remember is the boomers came through. They were very hardworking. They were very skill-driven. They were very educated. They worked 60-hour weeks. They participated in the labor force and really provided us with a deep pool of people that were highly educated, highly skilled. And they were replaced by a generation, especially for men, where there was a little bit less of an interest in being in that labor force. The other thing that we can tell you about this, a lot of these prime age men, is that there were increasingly, well, not just prime age men, but just increasingly we were having problems getting people to engage in full-time jobs. This graph here represents the number of people that were working part-time because they wanted to work part-time. Not part-time because they had to, but because they're making a choice to do that. And we can see this really with prime age men once again. So the blue, of course, is people doing part-time because they have to. The red is doing part-time because you want to. And we can see that over time, we were seeing prime age, 25 to 54-year-old men, just so you understand what prime age is. As these millennials were coming in, as Xers were taking over and the boomers were exiting out of this, we see more and more men in particular choosing to walk away from full-time work to do part-time. Where we see this is in a very complicated table, and I apologize for this table, but I'm going to guide you through the one part of this table that I want you to see just to illustrate this point. So this is a table that was produced by ADP. Unfortunately, they don't update it as much as I would like, but this was a snapshot of where we were just prior to last year. And what this shows is what happens since they're monitoring checks. They're looking at what industry were you in, and then where did you go? So what we can tell from this table, if we look at the left side, these are the industries people left. And then as you go through the tables, this is the percentage of those people that left that went to other industries. So go to the manufacturing line, and as you go across there, one thing you notice is we see this significant percentage of people leaving manufacturing going over into things like retail trade, so things more part-time in schedules. Now, in the article, I go into really good detail as to why these behaviors were occurring. It actually involves, as crazy as it sounds, video games. You can read about that in the article. But the research is there to show that people, for different reasons, some of it financial, just the ability to do so, some of it because of just their desire to work part-time to do their hobbies, we're walking away from full-time to go to part-time jobs. So this is our backdrop. Before everything kind of went a little bit off kilter last year, we had a record low unemployment rate. We had boomers that were already retiring at pretty decent numbers. We had a generation behind them that was a lot less interested in work, especially full-time. From a male perspective, this was all happening and had been happening over the course of time. So with that in mind, we get to the present. Now, what I've titled this slide is, it's not just a perfect storm. We basically stuck a hurricane and a tornado and an earthquake, and we smashed them all together into one thing. Everything that we couldn't have happened very quickly. So what we talk about in the article is that we knew we were on a long-term trend that was going to pretty much rob us of a lot of our labor force. What we did during COVID was we accelerated that pedal pretty dramatically. Whoops, hold on, sorry. Things going the wrong way. All right, so first things first. Right now, if we look, this whole context is what's going on right now. So first things, we are now up to 9.2 million job postings. So our record hovering of around 7 million of where we were pre-COVID has been destroyed by where we are right now, which is 9.2 million. So why do we have all of these job postings? But more than that, let's just keep covering, what happened? What went wrong? So this is the primary culprit of where we are right now. Labor force participation. So you have a population of people. To be considered in the labor force, you either have to have a job, employed, or you have to be actively looking for a job. You are only unemployed if you are actively looking for a job and you cannot find one. You are not unemployed if you've dropped out of the labor force and you are not looking for work. That doesn't count as far as the government looks at these things. So we actually want to look at both of those things, and we're going to do that here. So this is more of that I've dropped out of the labor force and I don't want to have a job anymore. We see that we took this really significant drop initially, which we all suspected. What we didn't suspect is what's happened since. So we started to recover, and then we flatlined, and we flatlined for a full year now. So despite all of these measures, despite vaccinations, despite all of these things, people aren't coming back. And there's an explanation to an extent of how we're going to explain some of this, but just understand this is what we're feeling right now is this huge drop and then people not coming back. These percentage points that we're seeing here, when you drop from like 63.5 down to like a 61 point something, you're talking millions and millions of people. In fact, if we held the same labor force participation rate from the 90s to where we are now, we'd have 13.4 million more people in our labor force than we have. It's not that we don't have anybody at all. It's that we increasingly have less and less people who want to engage in the labor force. Whoops, I don't know why I'm keep wanting to go back here. All right, so with that in mind, we can start to look at, well, let's look at these levels of unemployed. So we see this as well. The amount of people unemployed goes spiking up. It comes down. It flatlines. The people who are out of the labor force, this is, we were talking earlier about a percentage, but that's, I want you to actually see what it looks like in numbers. We went from about 96 million people who were out of the labor force here, and now we're sitting at just over 100 million. So we're missing around 5 million, 4 to 5 million people that are just not participating in this labor force that we had just before COVID struck. We got some of them back, and then we've stopped. Now I'm going to try to explain something that's really, it's something that it's a little bit shocking. One of the issues that we're running into right now that's making this feel a lot more painful is that the U.S. is not exactly what you think it is. For years, we've all been told about the, what about the average Joe and, that blue-collar worker? America has evolved away from that over time, but it's something that you really didn't necessarily feel. So if we look at the current labor force over 25, we see that we have about 96 million people that at least have an associate's degree. When we look at people who only have a high school diploma or less, you're talking more of like around 44 million that only have that level of education. The problem that you have with that is what we need right now are unskilled laborers. So we have 6 million, roughly around 6 million of our 9.2 million job openings that don't require a college degree. These are restaurant workers. They're working in retail stores. They're working in a warehouse. They're assembly line workers in a plant. These are the types of job openings that we have. These are the jobs that kind of move the economy along. These are what you feel when they don't get filled. You don't feel when a software company can't hire an IT person to build them a new phone app. You don't feel that near as much as when you go down to McDonald's and they're taking forever to fill an order and they're like, sorry, we only have 2 people in here right now. We feel this difference. If you look at this graph, on the left side, you're seeing the amount of jobs that we have open by skill level. On the right side, you're seeing the population of unemployed people that match that. So if we look at the current number, so that 3.39 million is the actual number of unemployed people in the United States right now who have a high school degree or less versus this 6 million job openings. And if you look up above, you actually see we have 4.2 million unemployed people that have at least an associate's degree, but only 3.2 million job openings roughly that require a college degree. So this is one of the reasons why you feel this more than we've ever felt anything before, because this has never happened. We used to call this a split economy, where people who were educated and had all these things, they were riding through recessions pretty well. If you go back to the early 90s, if you go back to the early 2000s, they got through these recessions pretty well. Those people that were less educated really felt a lot of the pain. However, this time, what we really need is that low-end worker, and they are actually sitting in a situation where they have multiple job opportunities, but we just don't have very many of them. So in the past, we would say, well, that's okay. We're just going to make up with this through immigration. The problem is, if you think about last year, everybody closed their borders. We didn't have immigration last year. So we have been declining in immigration over the years. Last year, it really kind of slammed shut on us. This is not realistic. It's not sustainable. It's not long-term. However, it is very important that everyone understands that we have been declining in our immigration numbers for years. It's more than politics. It has to do with the fact that a lot of the countries that we've typically gotten workers from are also becoming more educated, needing people in their own economies. They're having way fewer children than they used to have. All of these factors, the countries that we used to really get a lot of people from, it's actually getting a lot more difficult to find those people. So just so we understand that particular part, I think somebody has kind of raised hand, but if we could just hold to the end and we'll do all our questions at the end. Just so keep an eye on that. But I promise you, we'll have enough time at the end and we'll talk about everything.
We'll definitely grab them. You got it.
I promise I will. I always make enough time. So we have all this. We have this backdrop. We know we're having this group of population. They're not coming back into the labor force. We know we have this problem of re-engagement, and I want to tell you exactly why these things are occurring right now. So first off, when we had this downturn, unlike anything we've ever experienced, we've always had true recessions in the U.S., which is, demand waivers, parts of the economy start to collapse just because they've been basically overvalued, overinflated. So we've had, the housing market was overinflated. We needed to correct that. Or the oil market overinflated in the 70s, and you need to correct those overinflations. In the early 2000s, it was telecom equipment. Everybody was buying telecom equipment, but they weren't even taking the time to install it. And next thing you know, the IT industry in that world kind of collapsed. This one was very different. In this one, we said, hey, let's pause things. The economy was absolutely crushing it. We said, let's pause. And everybody who lost their job was told, hey, you're probably going to come back. At least 80% of people believed they were getting their jobs back. This is a very different backdrop than what we've had in the past. Everybody who was leaving was saying, you know what, I feel like I'm going to get my job back. If you look at this, you do see a pretty significant spike right back afterwards. But something happened to this gap that we have, this 5 million that we're trying to continue to make up. They did not come back, even though we have all of these job openings. Now, part of the reason that we see this is we do have still a significant amount of people collecting pandemic unemployment assistance and pandemic emergency unemployment compensation. So all told, including regular UI with these other things, we still have 13.6 million people who are collecting checks of some sort, and those will continue until early September, as it is right now. Hopefully we don't extend that. So we do know that there are a number of people that are collecting assistance, and we're stacking that up against this 9.2 million. So if we talk about what's new, well, what's new is what you normally would have in this graph is there would be 3.2 million people on regular unemployment. That's all we would really have. These other two numbers are new numbers. These were created as a means of assisting people who said that they were being affected by the pandemic. That could mean that they were afraid to go back to work. You can collect checks for that. You lost your job because of the pandemic. There are different means of how you can collect these forms. But this kind of assistance is something that we did not have in any other recession. I'm not going to go through that timeline. A huge part of this is that when we hit these CARES Act checks that went out, I know you hear about this, but what I want to try to do here is show you graphically what's just happened. These checks that went in threw basically $4 trillion into our economy. And like I said, our economy was doing pretty well. And then we put an incredible infusion of cash after that fact. When you put all that cash in, and the way that these CARES Act payments were designed, they went to people. So if we look at median household income, it has shot through the roof. It has absolutely skyrocketed in the past year or two. So we threw money at people who already had a lot of money, and it really inflated the amount of earnings that people had. This has an effect of enabling, if you're making a decision of, hey, look, I'm a little unsure whether I want to return right now. I'm afraid about some things still. I really like to see certain things happen before I come back. It makes it a lot easier to do that if you financially don't have to do that in the near term. So I don't really want to get into the negatives and positives of all these, but only to explain that we really boosted household income during this time. Now, something I talked about earlier, we knew boomers were retiring. But what COVID did is it slammed an accelerator pedal down on something that we were imagining was going to happen slowly over a number of years. It happened really, really quickly. So we had been averaging around 2 million people retiring every year. Last year, we lost 3.2 million, so pretty much a doubling of where we had been in the prior year. So all of these people that were still kind of working, semi-engaged, just left the labor force completely. So that is a factor we talked about earlier. Boomer retirements, this thing was accelerated here. Now, probably one of the most important things you can see is if you would go back to those graphs and I said, hey, labor force participation rate started to recover and then it stalled. Hey, unemployment started to get better and then it stalled. The amount of people out of the labor force looking for a job started to get better and then it stalled. In a survey done in May, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce interviewed 9.3 million people who said that they lost their jobs initially from the pandemic. Of that group, 1.2 million said they're never coming back. 1.6 million said, I'm not coming back this year. 3.5 million said, I'm going to come back at some point, but I'm not looking for a job right now, which means only 3 million of those 9.3 million people are actually looking for a job right now. So another reason why we feel this pain is there are a lot of people who lost their jobs, but only 1 out of 3 of those are actually looking for a job right now. The rest are kind of waiting things out a little bit longer. The last part I want to talk about, this is something I have spoken on for years. It's one of the hardest subjects to speak on, is in particular opioid deaths. Now, we go back to, hey, we have a lot of unskilled labor job openings, and we do not have the unskilled labor people to put in those jobs. One of the biggest culprits from a male perspective is the dead-eye center of opioid epidemics tends to be in that prime age male. So sometimes it's right before that. We see it anywhere around 21 to 22, but where we really feel it is up through the lower 20s into the lower 30s. And last year, we set an all-time record with 93,000 drug overdoses from opioids, and that was up from 72,000 the year before. We've been losing an increasing amount every year, somewhere around 50 to 60,000 yearly, 72,000 in 2019. Last year, 93,000. If you could get all of those people back, you're talking hundreds of thousands of prime age men that would be engaged. In addition to the deaths, you have a number of men, it's estimated 860,000 are out because they're battling these addictions right now. So these aren't people that have passed away. These are people who aren't working because they are battling opioid addiction right now. So another reason why we feel this and a lot of jobs that prime age men pretty much would have taken, construction, manufacturing, warehouse, is because these people have increasingly been robbed out of the labor force due to these particular conditions. So with that incredibly awful background in mind, we're going to talk about really where we were going with in the systemic article. So one way you could crawl out of this problem is you say, well, we need to be rescued by an increasing amount of people coming in. You know, we know we have in this declining labor force participation, but maybe the next generation, it's going to get better than where we are. Unfortunately, since the 1970s, we have not been at a replacement level with births. In fact, our birth rate has continued to go down. So what we're if you look at that baby boom generation, if you look what came after it, this means that all these years afterwards, we were always birthing fewer and fewer people. So as we talk about where we are right now with prime age people, understand they weren't born. So if we look at, these are birth rates at replacement level. So you need a 2.1 birth rate per woman to replace the population. In 2003, the states in blue were meeting that criteria. In the 2017, the states in blue are the ones meeting that criteria. So we only had 2 states that met a replacement rate in 2017. Those were South Dakota and Utah, not exactly our 2 most populous states. As you can see, the Northeast, which has been a problem for a long time, has continued to become much, much older. They're not having children. So just one of the things we have to understand was that. And then last year, as I think everybody's well aware, we stopped having children pretty much entirely. We set our all-time record for the lowest birth rate in our history. Now, numbers coming out right now are saying, hey, we're starting to bounce back in 2021, but bouncing back is the levels that we were in 2019, and those weren't very good birth rates as well. So understand that this plays a factor like this. So first off, I want you to understand our population growth of the past decade mirrored the decade after the Great Depression. This is when people were very afraid to have children. You know, they knew that they were dealing with starvation and all these other things. This is what it looked like the past 10 years. And we can see, actually, I'm going to skip those 2 because I want to focus on something here. But just so you understand, from 2011 to 2021, anything you see here in red means that their working age population shrunk. So this is just so you understand, this is not about populations, it's about people who are considered to be in the labor force of working age. So we see in 20 to 21, most counties, you can look around at yours on here, find where you are in the map, but you can see most of the country was not at a replacement level. If we look at the amount of counties that were at least having children 15 and under that population was growing, we see a lot of the country also wasn't producing, we don't have that population under 15 that was also growing. That also was declining. So we were losing a working age population. And then the population that's going to come in and replace those people is also declining. For colleges, this is really devastating. Enrollments have been going down for a long period of time. First-time enrollments are expected to really drop. And colleges are becoming increasingly aware of this. And not to insult anybody's children, I have my own son going into college right now, but a lot of kids were accepted into universities they've never been accepted to in the past year because enrollments are down so dramatically. Universities are dying to try to fill their classes right now. This is something they're going to increasingly feel. Now, this is a slide worth looking at. These look so small, what you're seeing here. It just looks really tiny, these green lines. What this is the actual number of people for each year, how old they are. So 22 years old down to less than a year old in the U.S. right now. So if we look at this, at the top, you have more people, obviously 22 years old, than you have at, 17 years old. And if you have more people, 17-year-olds, at like 10-year-olds. And then it goes down to even less of 3 and 2 years old. This is what's going to cycle through our economy, obviously, over the next 20 years. And those numbers keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And like I said, last year, we had our lowest birth rate ever. So these numbers have really taken a hit. So basically, any pain that we're feeling now as a result of a shrinking population is just going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse as time goes on. And what you end up with, and this is something that is a particular concern, is I've heard people go, well, hey, a shrinking population, isn't that what we always wanted? I mean, people always said we were going to consume all the global resources and everything. And I'm like, hey, that sounds good, just as long as you're not the population that needs to be supported at the top when the younger population isn't there to support. And so this is, you see kind of how upside down we get as the percentage of people, 60% of our population will be within, will be within working age by the year 2100. So we are talking about the biggest problem that we face is what do we do to kind of support these things right now. If you look at where we are, even what you kind of feel in the community right now, you feel this to an extent. So, we are a generation that is used to having 24-hour service stations. You'd go to the hospital, and a number of people would look at you and be with you to guide you through certain things. But right now, because we can't fill those job openings, there's less people to service us in a service economy. This is something that you will feel more and more and more and more going forward. I have a friend who is a manager of a bunch of gas stations. They've already cut their overnight shifts. He's like, we can't staff them. I know a lot of people in restaurants who are not doing lunch or dinner or just doing drive-through, or I'm sorry, just doing takeout because they can't staff them. This will get better. I mean, where we're at right now, those lines should start to recover a bit. But understand that the long term, these are the things that you're going to feel more and more and more, is we don't have the ability to kind of employ people to the nth degree like we've had. There will be simply less people. So we just have to be a lot more efficient in the way that we employ them. One of the things that I want to make sure that I hammer on, early on I talked about immigration used to be our answer. But one of the factors that we have studied for years, it was in Hans Rosling's book, Factfulness. If you've not read it, it's an outstanding book. He's since passed on. But what Hans Rosling did in his book is he basically would go out to people and he'd ask them questions about the world. So he would go to MIT or Harvard and he'd talk to these professors or such, and he would go to business conferences and he'd ask them questions about the world. How much of the world's in poverty? How much of the world still has a birth rate over a certain number? And no matter what population he spoke to, they always answered in a way that was consistent with the way the world was in the 1960s, but certainly not the way it is in the 2010s. People had a very outdated view of the world conditions. And I find, like we were talking earlier, that's kind of the same thing that's happening in the U.S. right now, is there's still this belief that we have a lot of low-end workers when we don't. The other belief we have is that we know our birth rates falling quite a bit in the U.S., but this is happening everywhere. And this is a studied phenomenon that he did, which is as more and more, as a greater women in a population become college degreed or gain a higher degree of education, birth rates come down. It's something that has been studied over the past 20 years. And so we have had our plunging birth rate. The world has had a plunging birth rate. If you look at this graph, the countries below us, Korea, an article came out last week. Korea is closing schools like crazy. They're merging schools together. They do not have children. Their birth rate's around 0.7. Japan is around a 0.9. Italy is definitely struggling significantly. China's one-child policy has had a pretty devastating effect. So all of these countries are not able, they're not at a level that will replenish as their boomer populations pass on. They do not have a population to support it. So they have started their population inversion, much like we will start ours. So it's something that we just don't have this, you can run, but you can't hide. The second thing about it is, increasingly, as countries are becoming more educated, there's the dual issue of they're having less births, but as they're becoming more educated and trying to develop their economies, they need their workers to do so. A classic example is India. For years, a supplier of IT talent to the U.S. India now, you can Google this. There's a lot of articles out there. They have such a shortage of IT talent over there, and they're trying to grow businesses and everything, but they don't have the people to do it. So this is something that the whole world feels. So we're feeling it. Other countries are feeling it, some of them way worse than we are, but understand that this is something not just unique to us. You pretty much see it in any developed nation. Which brings us to the what can you do? So like I said, the answers here aren't going to be things you're going to go out and go, hey, well, that totally worked for us. This is how we figured it out. These are things that we figured out over time. As a result of what we see, these are elements that you can probably, get something out of. The easy first one is raise wages. I'm not a fan of this one. You have to be competitive, but raising wages turns into a game of everybody loses. You raise your wages a little bit more and you take from this person. So they raise their wage and they steal them back again. And it gets a little, that's not a strategy. That's just, kind of a panic short-term attempt at just trying to find something immediately, but it's not going to help you in the long run. Other things you can do is make the jobs more meaningful, offer non-wage incentives. This could be a seat at the table as you're making, executive decisions, allowing your workers to be, feel like they're more involved. The big ones I'm going to hit on are the last three on this slide, and there's a couple on the next. First off, simplify your job requirements. Understand that your job requirements, all of the things you asked for, were because of the boomers. They were driven, they upskilled, they acquired enormous resumes. When you put a job posting out, 80 people applied for it, and a lot of these people were really highly qualified. We don't have that population anymore. We have a lot fewer people out there looking for work, and their resumes aren't going to be near as impressive for the reasons we kind of discussed. So the best thing that I would recommend is take us back to kind of where we were in the 50s and 60s, which is find really good people, keep them, which is the next point. And then the last point on this is get really, really good at training. Get a good person in and then have a world-class training program that gets them up to speed and ready to execute immediately. That kind of thinking is how you succeed. When you can't find exactly what you want, you get close to what you want and you make it what you want. And you treat the people really well, you keep them if you can, and that's how you can at least be competitive as you're dealing with fewer resources. The other point that I really want to hammer here is the one on the left. It's really difficult. I talked to people, after we wrote the article, I had a lot of people contact me and say, hey, I just want to talk to you. I'm in HR. It's been really difficult. I mean, our company leaders are basically feeling like we're incompetent now. We're putting postings out. We're not getting hits. They think we're doing stuff wrong. And, what can we do? What can we do? And that's the part, that was why I wanted to write the article in the first place. This conversation has got to get out of just HR, and it needs to get to the executive boardroom. Companies need to treat their utility of labor like they look at who are we going to sell to this year? What kind of products are we learning to develop? What kind of ROI are we hoping to get from these things? These kind of conversations have to happen. The reason why I took that one graph that I showed you with the green lines getting lower every year, we know that fewer and fewer people are going to be entering the labor force every single year from this point on. So if that's the case, then you should have, if you're feeling any pain now, then it really needs to be a part of what you're doing going forward. So that is something I cannot emphasize enough. We hope that the article, we hope that everything that I'm telling you, anything that you can do to go in and have those conversations, we hope that you have that information. That is a biggest part. We recorded this conversation. If people need to see these things, they need to see these things. But we're really trying to get the word out that this is the stuff that you have to do, is you've got to elevate this conversation. This kind of reinvesting in industrial engineering, where people used to go in and say, how do we utilize labor? You know, what things can we combine? You know, if you think about a restaurant, is it so far-fetched to say the person who welcomes you in also takes your order, also busses your table at the end? You know, do we have to have a separate person for each one of those things? I know it makes the customer feel really good, but if your restaurant has to shut down because you don't have certain roles being filled, maybe we have to relook at how those roles are utilized, and we can do that with pretty much any job. And then we have there on the last side, depending on the kind of industry you're in, I'm a big fan of partnering with the prison system. You're not just partnering with the prison system, you're actually partnering with the state. A lot of states have programs. They have back to work programs. They'll assist with the training. They'll do a certain level of insurance on these types of things. So just be aware that anything you have to do to try to go after people versus just slamming another job posting up against tens of thousands of other job postings, you're going to have to take this to the next level. The pain you're feeling right now is worse than what we have felt recently, but understand it was bad before, and we're really only going to try to get back to where we were, and we're probably not even going to get back to bad. It's probably going to get back to fairly painful yet again. So I am, like I say, that's a lot of tough information to take, but I just want to make sure that we did get to communicate those things. So I know a number of things came in. So let's go ahead.
We'll fire away on a few of them. Thank you so much, Ron. It's like you said, it's not all pleasant, but it is reality, and that's what we're all facing. So first and foremost, you know, you mentioned the pandemic aid ending in September-ish. You know, what do you think will happen for employers, whether they're, you know, software companies, you know, probably not impacted too much, but that whole layer of blue collar retail restaurants, you know, what do you think is going to happen in that between September and, you know, what we consider one of the busiest retail seasons, you know, of the year, every year, you know, between September and December?
So until I saw the U.S. Chamber of Commerce survey, I was more hopeful. I still felt that even once the programs ended, because if you look right now, like where states have ended expanded UI benefits, they're not getting massive amounts of people coming back. And I hope that U.S. Chamber of Commerce survey helps. I hope that helps people understand, like, it's something bigger going on here. And I think part of that, just that disengagement, and I'm not totally sure I want to come back. One of those reasons is because there was a significant accumulation of wealth that occurred, and people say, well, how long can that last? Certainly that can't be, those benefits can't be as good as working. And the answer is they can't be as good, but you can still go a pretty decent amount of time. I feel that if we can get a lot of things, the stars need to kind of align here. It'd be nice if kind of COVID fears could kind of ease up a little bit. We have a bit of a kind of a predicted resurgence going on, a little bit of that happening right now. But each time you get those disruptions, the people that were already kind of on the sides, it kind of reinforces that I'm just not quite sure just yet. And I think that hesitancy is why you saw a significant amount of people saying, hey, not this year. Let's just let everything kind of play out. So what I think you're going to see, this is my prediction, you will see probably a couple million people come back over the course of September to November. I'm not so sure this could be a really painful end of year season for us. I think a lot of companies that are going to try to ramp up. What we can really kind of hope and pray for is that if the stars align and some of these other things kind of work themselves out, maybe we can entice people back in. But one thing I will say is money so far has not worked. We're seeing huge pay increases. Somebody who just got back from Las Vegas told me they saw a dishwasher, $20 an hour, start right now. And I even said to them, I'm like, they're probably not going to fill that job. $20 an hour for a dishwasher. But, you see that this level of desperation, we called this would be the summer of blood. It's happening. August is going to be really terrible as well. I think September is going to be pretty painful. I think in October you'll start to see some of these people kind of working their way back in. But like I said, some of the things have to fix themselves a little bit too.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. One of the questions we had was specifically about healthcare. Do you have any of the data broken down by healthcare, given the importance of the healthcare, healthcare's role throughout this whole crisis? Any thoughts or insights there, or any actual data that you have on the healthcare market?
Just so I'm sure I understand that question, is the question around having coverage, is like people needing to work to have coverage, or is it what? I'm not quite sure I understand the angle.
Yeah, I'm sorry, just the healthcare workforce, and
healthcare workforce,
nurses, finding nurses, finding you have healthcare facilities that are short-staffed and trying to do their best. Do you have any data specifically that you pulled out? And if not, that's okay. But if not, just your opinion on how hospitals and long-term facilities can handle this and stay afloat.
Yeah, I actually recently spoke on a podcast for the healthcare industry, and it was a pretty tough conversation. The biggest thing that disrupted last year, which was travel, it really blew the market out a little bit. So we had wages hyper accelerate really beyond what should have been realistic. That particular market is so disjointed right now from an economic standpoint. It's kind of a mess, because to get people back to kind of this, hey, those days of $175 an hour as a travel nurse, they're going to, we don't have to have all of that happening, but yet people banked that money. So, there's a lot of people who took that, worked for 6-7 months, and they're like, look, I don't have to go back to work for a long time. And I know when I do go back to work, I'm going to have 20 job offers the second I do. So that is a disruption that I feel is going to take a little bit longer to work out. Outside, the thing that you have with healthcare is you're subjected to, from the skilled side, it still comes down to, we have had a declining number of people going into the colleges. That's the graph that we're showing. That's kind of cuts across all fields. It's all, everybody's trying to get people to kind of go into their field. So I think the amount of graduates we get every year are going to be struggling. I also know that for a lot of these positions, immigration was a huge part of it. That travel nursing part, combined with the fact that immigration disappeared last year, was just so painful to the healthcare industry. I think the immigration part will come back. Like I said, that was absurd what happened. We all know why it happened. As economies increasingly open the borders and say, look, we're not going to hold you up. You can go, you can come back. As those things relax, you will get some relief. But I think what keep trying to hammer in this thing is it will get better. But I do not see things returning to not even the glory days, but how kind of bad it was in February of 2020. I don't see us getting back to there anytime soon for the reasons that I said. And I think part of that problem is that massive separation of boomers. And then there's holes everywhere, and people have so many options now. If let's say they just had a bad shift at work that day, I mean, they literally can change their mind tomorrow and they're going to be gobbled up. And I think that's particularly troubling in the healthcare industry.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
We know postings of sort. I mean, there's no doubt about it. We have that data, but I think we already know that we're feeling that.
Yeah. Absolutely. As far as, who out in the marketplace is, coming up with creative solutions and how to deal with all of these issues? Is there anybody that comes to mind?
Yeah, I love it. It's my favorite question. So I was on the phone with the Wall Street Journal last week, and we talked for an hour, and at the end she's just sitting there kind of staring at her computer, and she goes, all right, can you give us examples of companies that have come up with, have come up with creative ways of dealing with this? And the truth of the matter is, I'm still having calls where I'm trying to help console HR people that, hey, the pain you're feeling is real. And they're telling me, I still can't believe I'm getting this, that people are saying, hey, our leadership still doesn't even buy that this is happening. Like, there's this labor shortage. They just, they think there's other things happening. I think what's going on is we're in that awakening. So I think that one of the reasons why my speaking schedule is so full is everybody's trying to get this message out. And then once the message gets out, people start to plan, and it takes a couple months. And then the creative sides that you see happen months after that. I believe we're probably 6 months away from the times that you're going to start to hear really cool stories of what people are doing. Don't for a second think that automation is going to save us. I don't know if you know anything about that, and we write about it in the article. We are just so far away from collaborative robotics or these things that could come in to tackle these. The idea of robotics in service level jobs is just something that hasn't been a financially feasible model for people. Sticking a kiosk on the front end of a McDonald's doesn't change the game when you still go up and you put your order in and they give it to you, and there's people still in the back cooking. Like, we are just like a decade or two away from that becoming a reality. So I think just in the short term, we're all in this together. We're all going to have to go through this pain together. This is not something that you asked for, but it's just something that if there's anybody on this call who's going into a restaurant or anything and just gotten really angry at the service or anything like that, I would just say, try to adopt the model which I have, which is, I get it. I know it hurts right now, and understand that what pain you're feeling is a pain that everybody's feeling. We're feeling it, in our own company.
Yep. Do you one of the things when you mentioned the boomers retiring, and it is just such a massive group of people that contributed to the economy, during their retirement, do you see them coming out and working part-time? Maybe it wasn't what they thought, but it's out of necessity, not even for the economic benefit of it, like because they feel like they need to contribute again. Like, is that a possibility?
I'm so blown away that you just said that, Neil. I'm blown away you said it, because I keep thinking that. And I told my wife the other day, I'm like, why do I feel like I'm taking the entire burden of our labor shortage onto my shoulders? Like, I can do something about it. It's like, I wrote this article and now I feel like I wish that I could make it go away. And the problem, this is just, when we talk about accumulated wealth, if you go and read the article, I have a whole section where I talk about how median family income just started jumping and jumping and jumping. This never happened in the history of the world. You did not have two people over the course of 40, 50 years, both college educated, making a lot of money so that they can come back to work at 60, 65. They're retiring earlier than they ever have, and they're going out of the labor force. So it's on a slide that I had. I actually didn't read that particular part of the slide. Before COVID struck, the amount of people 55 and over that were going out of the labor force with no intention of coming back had been increasing as a percentage. So there was this thought that, hey, people are a lot healthier now. They want to work longer. We're going to have these people longer. That is not true. That is something we got to make sure that message gets stamped out. There are people that do that, and there are people that stay semi-engaged in work. However, the data shows that these people were retiring and enjoying their retirement years. They had accumulated a lot of wealth, and they were enjoying that wealth. I have thought so many times where I just sit there and go, well, maybe there's a point where they'll go, well, this stinks, man. Like, I'll go work at this restaurant and take orders. Like, if you go down, so I'm in Jacksonville, if you go down to Palm Coast and you go to the McDonald's down there, you will see retirees working in there, and it's like a party environment. You can tell that they're just like probably just doing this to entertain themselves. And I think about that and I'm like, oh, that's so great. I wish we could create that kind of environment. But what a cosmic shift of thinking that would take to have that be a wave in society.
Definitely. One other thing that we had chatted about a little bit on our previous call was the whole work from home housing marketplace. And I just didn't know if you wanted to, just because I think for a lot of our clients trying to figure out, should they have a more flexible policy? Should they force people in the office? And then I know you mentioned real estate prices are an impact, a factor as well. So I just want to get your thoughts on that. I think it's so interesting.
So mobility, right? I always attack this problem in this capacity. Mobility in the U.S., the ability to buy a home right now, I think everybody understands, is that we have the lowest home inventory we've ever had. There are no construction workers to build new homes. So cities are trying to grow, and they're moving their headquarters to like Austin, Texas, but there are no homes. It's hard to find homes because we don't have anybody to build those homes. Getting people to come to you is going to be really difficult. The way I feel about remote is, and I work remote, so I don't want to even come across like, you've got to do this. I think what we're trying to get at here is you do what you have to do. This is a suggestion that I have for people. And this popped into my head last week, but I've been kind of saying this on all of the association calls that I'm on and everything. Run parallel ads. See who you get. Try different jobs and see who applies. And when the people that apply for the jobs that are remote or semi-remote or things like that, ask them, hey, you know what? I'm just curious about, what appeals to you about this job. Get a feel for what's going on there, and then look at the people that are willing to kind of come in if you get those things. The decisions are going to kind of be made for you, but there's no harm in at least testing a couple things. I'm not saying you do this grand scale, else, if you have no intention of filling something remote, then it's kind of like baiting and switching. But there is a way that you can kind of gather market intel. Also, as you're doing exit interviews, if you do exit interviews, and I love exit interviews, I really hope everybody does them, see if you lose people because of those particular things. Everybody's out there. Everybody kind of has an understanding that remote is here to stay. I know of a company that just said no more remote, but I know that company's trying to get rid of people. So I know that they're using that as a way of kind of weeding people out. But I think that you really have to kind of look at the jobs and go, what jobs really simply don't have to be in this physical location? And then, so many things do have to be, and I admire that. And I know a lot of people were building buildings before COVID struck, and they want people in those buildings. How about just don't do it all at once? How about pull the Band-Aid off slowly get people accustomed to being back in there, making grandiose statements right now on these market conditions. Maybe, unless you really do want to kind of cut back your workforce, may hurt you. I think that there's no need to make, pronounced judgments, but I think bring people in. I think the strangest thing, the youngest generation, Generation Z, is the ones that have said the most that they want to be back in the office. So it's an odd thing that we're seeing is younger people are craving this kind of connection. And I think that you might be able to engage them in that way. Where you're seeing this really being drawn in the sand are those near to retiring boomers who are kind of like, I'm over this, I'm not going back in.
Yep. Great. Very good. One little follow on that one, wages. I think I saw an article about a Google worker from Palo Alto that was being asked to move to RTP in North Carolina, and a wage adjustment was necessary with that move. What are your thoughts on that? Is a worker worth what they are worth, or is it adjusted by market? And I think a lot of people would love to hear that answer or your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So right now we're building a new tool. It's for the staffing industry, and in that, what we're doing is I asked for this because I was like, let's put several things beside each other. Let's put like the local wage, kind of that median, and then let's put the remote wage up there, so that as people are trying to make decisions about things, they understand where someone sits. Now, I'm going to sound like I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth, but I'm really not. When you are a company in Palo Alto and you can go get somebody remote, I know this was happening because I talked to a staffing company in Detroit. They're like, every time we go to fill something, somebody out in California has already hired them and they're employing them remote. And they do it because they know they don't have to offer them much. Not near as much as what they pay out there. So first off, you have companies that are in high cost of living areas that are like, oh my goodness, I can go to Cincinnati where, homes are half the price of where we're at here. And I can get somebody who's going to think what I'm paying, $120,000 is going to be like a gold mine to them when they were making $80,000. Meanwhile, I was paying my developer $250,000. So I'm making a huge savings. Other companies who are in smaller markets, you're competing against those kind of people who look at those things and go, hey, $120,000 is a big savings to me. And you're going, oh man, I can only pay $80,000. So there's this aspect of remote that kind of hits you from both sides. But as far as people going, hey, we are demanding that you move to a lower cost of living place and we're going to cut your salary, that individual worker has to make a decision for themselves. Are companies in their full rights to do such a thing? Yes, absolutely. They're in full rights. They can ask anything they want. But the current labor conditions that we're in right now, companies don't have a lot of power. But if you think that this person loses that job and they're going to be able to find another job right in that market and you value them, then you won't do that. If you think that they're going to do this and they're going to do it, then you go for it. But these are risks. I mean, you got to weigh those risks. I'm not going to give you a blanket answer on them.
No, all good. That was helpful insight. I appreciate it. Listen, Ron, good information, not good times, but good information, right? We really appreciate all the time and effort and the explanation on on your perspective on this marketplace. So, hopefully we can do it again down the road as we see things change, but much appreciated.
Peace.
All right, man.
Yeah, hopefully things change and I can come back and give a good call.
Yeah, it sounds good. All right. Take care. You have a good afternoon.